There are moments when life gives us a choice to walk away or to reach out and touch the thing that stirs us. Sometimes we say no and the moment passes. Other times, by some quiet mercy, it returns. Older, a bit more expensive, but waiting for us all the same. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing, a podcast about unfinished conversations, second chances, and the small miracles of timing that remind us we're allowed to begin again. In today's story, you'll meet Elliot, an Australian living in Trieste, Italy, with roots that reach back to the city's narrow alleys and open skies. Years ago, at a Sunday market tucked behind Piazza Unità, he saw a small painting, yellow fields under a crooked horizon, and felt, for a moment, that strange tug of beauty that doesn't explain itself. He almost bought it. Almost. This is a story about what happens when life gives us a second chance. Not just to buy the thing we walked away from, but to become the person who finally says yes. Trieste's ghetto isn't really a ghetto anymore, not in the tragic sense. It's the part of the city that looks like it woke up stylishly by accident. Narrow alleys, laundry lines that could double as high wire acts, and the faint smell of espresso and old paper. Every third Sunday of the month, the flea market appears there like a collective yard sale for ghosts. Tables of clocks that no longer tick, mirrors that lie kindly, and paintings that look like they've been waiting decades for someone to mistake them for art. I was 35 that morning, old enough to appreciate art, young enough to believe I might still become interesting someday. That's the dangerous age. You think you've evolved because you've stopped buying cheap furniture, but you still won't commit to anything that doesn't come with a return policy. I wasn't looking for anything. No one ever is at a flea market. You go to reassure yourself that beauty still exists, but it's probably overpriced and missing a frame. That's when I saw it. It was leaning against a crate of yellowed postcards, a small painting of a field, bright, defiant yellows under a horizon line that leaned like it had one too many spritz. The brushstrokes were bold but uncertain, the kind of confidence you only see in people or paintings that haven't been told no yet. The vendor, a man whose cigarette ash seemed to have its own weather system, noticed me staring. 30 euro, he said. From Udine. Not famous, but cheerful. He was right. It was cheerful in the way lost dogs are cheerful. A little desperate, but hopeful. I held it for a moment. It was lighter than I expected. The back smelled faintly of turpentine and optimism. 30 euros. I could afford it. I could also afford to make a better decision, I thought. And that's how regret usually begins, with the quiet arrogance of, I'll find something better. I handed back, pretending to be a man who had standards. 20 minutes later, when I returned, the painting was gone. For years I thought about it. That crooked horizon became my personal ghost. I had seen it in other paintings, on cereal boxes, in sunsets that were just trying too hard. Friends found it amusing that I could romanticize a lost €30 purchase into an epic of longing. But regret, I've learned, doesn't care about scale. It'll attach itself to a missed phone call as easily as a missed opportunity for joy. Time passed, not dramatically, just steadily. I moved apartments twice, collected more coffee mugs and emotional insights, and started to pretend my IKEA prints were minimalists. Occasionally, I'd find myself back in the ghetto on a Sunday, wandering the stalls like a ghost revisiting a crime scene. Not looking for the painting exactly, just proof that I hadn't imagined it. Each time, I'd leave empty-handed, comforted by the possibility that someone else was out there appreciating my painting and learning my lesson for me. Then, one spring morning, 11 years later, almost to the month, the air was warm and the city felt newly washed, like someone had taken a damp cloth to its old stones. I was wandering the same alleys, past the usual tables of typewriters and postcards, when I stopped. There it was, leaning in the exact same place, against what might have been the same crate. The yellow fields, the crooked horizon, the house that still looked like it was trying to stand up straight. The colors had softened, the varnish cracked, and the frame looked like it had lived through something. But I knew it instantly. My first thought was absurdly tender. You waited. My second thought was, of course, it's more expensive. The tag read €90. I laughed out loud, startling a nearby woman holding a lamp shaped like a swan. Of course, the universe had inflated the price of wisdom. This time, I didn't think. I paid the €90 and handed the vendor 100. Keep the change, I said. For what? He asked. For the lesson, I said. He wrapped it in newspaper and passed it over with the indifference of a man who had just witnessed someone buy back a fragment of their own soul. I carried it home through Piazza Unità, the sunlight sharp, the sea air reminding me that even mistakes can smell romantic if you walk briskly enough. At home, I hung it above the kitchen table, slightly crooked, of course. Tradition is important. I made coffee and sat looking at it, feeling ridiculous and whole at the same time. It was, objectively speaking, not a very good painting, but it had waited for me. Through time, through weather, through whatever existential storage unit it had languished in. And maybe that's what grace looks like. Not forgiveness exactly, but repetition with better timing. In the weeks that followed, something subtle shifted. Buying the painting didn't fix anything monumental, but it made me notice things again, like how the barista at my corner cafe had switched from powdered chocolate to real cocoa on cappuccinos, or how the pigeons outside my window seemed to have personalities. One particularly bold one I named Fabrizio. It's as if the painting had adjusted the aperture on my attention. Suddenly, everything seemed like a possible second chance waiting for me to notice. A few days later, at the bakery on Via Cavana, I got a burnt brioche. Normally, I'd have smiled politely and eaten it out of Aussie guilt. But something in me decided to try a new approach. "This one smells like Sunday morning," I said. The woman behind the counter blinked, then laughed, really laughed. The next day, my brioche was perfect. Coincidence? Maybe. But I prefer to think of it as the bakery's version of redemption. That same week, I saw an old friend across the street. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years because of an argument I no longer remembered. We did the awkward nod and walk thing, that tiny social dance of almosts. I was halfway down the block before the painting's yellow flared in my mind like a highlighter. I turned around. We ended up having coffee and laughing about how dramatic we had been. Apparently, forgiveness works faster when caffeine is involved. And then there was the woman on the train. She always sat by the window reading a paperback aloud in a whisper, mouthing each word like someone rehearsing to be slightly better tomorrow. I had wanted to tell her how much I admire that kind of shameless concentration, but I didn't. Because this is Italy, and complimenting a stranger can either start a friendship or a lawsuit. That week, I took my chances. She smiled and said, "I'm practicing for a job interview. They said enthusiasm helps." Apparently it did. She got the job. We still have coffee sometimes, though neither of us has any idea what we're practicing for now. It's astonishing how many second chances life leaves lying around, unlabeled, unclaimed, disguised as small inconveniences. A bus you miss, only to meet someone on the next one. A plan that falls through, only to make space for something better. The plant you nearly killed, but that decides to live out of spite. If you're looking, the world keeps saying, "Here, try again." One night, I caught myself staring at the painting again. The horizon seemed less crooked. Maybe it was the light. Or maybe the longer you look at something you love, the more you forgive it for not being perfect. I realized it wasn't about art at all. It was about permission. Permission to want something. To risk looking foolish. To spend 90 euros on the luxury of self-forgiveness. The painting didn't represent my taste. It represented my upgrade. Sometimes I like to imagine the painter, someone who probably painted for the joy of color, never imagining their work would become the spiritual mascot of a stranger's emotional growth. If there's an afterlife, I hope they're getting royalties and satisfaction. I think about that now when I'm hesitating, whether it's sending a message saying I'm sorry or ordering dessert. The painting above my table seems to whisper, "You've done worse things than this." And it's right. When friends come over now, they always comment on the painting. "It's nice," they say, the way people do when they're not sure if you overpaid. And I say, "Yes, it cost me 90 euros and a decade of self-awareness." They laugh. I smile because it's true. Every time I look at it, I think, maybe the point of regret isn't to hurt. Maybe it's just to wake us up in time for the sequel. If I could rewind that day in the market, I wouldn't change much. Maybe just the hesitation. Because what I've learned since is that life has a way of offering you the same question twice, just to see if you've learned how to answer it. And when it does, I hope I remember that the right answer isn't always logical. It's often just a quiet, wholehearted yes. And that was The Painting I Never Bought and Finally Did. When we first spoke, Elliot told me this wasn't really a story about art. It was about noticing, about how the universe sometimes gives us a do-over, just to see if we've learned how to answer differently the second time. In the conversation you're about to hear, we talk about those yellow fields, the price of wisdom, and what it means to recognize a second chance when it appears. As always, all names and identifying details have been changed for privacy. Elliot, thank you for sitting down with me. You know, when you first told me this story about a 30-euro painting that got away, I think I laughed. But then I stopped laughing because it wasn't about the painting at all, was it?
No, not really. I mean, at the time it was. I was genuinely sulking over a bit of canvas with a crooked horizon. But looking back, it was about how many times I talked myself out of saying yes to something that felt good. That painting just happened to be the first witness.
So walk me through that day. You were 35, living in Trieste, wandering through the ghetto. What kind of headspace were you in back then?
The usual. That lovely cocktail of mild arrogance and quiet panic you have in your 30s. I'd been in Italy for a few years, working remotely, telling myself I was living the dream, but really I was just becoming excellent at standing still. So when I saw the painting, I thought, well, you don't need that, which is exactly what people say right before they make a mistake.
In the story, you walked away thinking you'd find something better. I think that's such a universal phrase. It applies to objects, people, careers.
Dinner menus, relationships, dogs. Yes, absolutely. Something better is the polite version of, I'm scared to want this right now.
That might be the most honest thing anyone has ever said on this podcast. Do you remember what went through your mind when you saw it again 11 years later?
Yeah, I actually laughed. Loudly, in public, which I don't recommend in Trieste unless you want grandmas staring at you. But it was shock and recognition, you know. I just stood there thinking, you waited, like it had been holding a place for me.
It sounds almost mystical, like the city gave you a second chance.
Yeah, I'm not religious, but I do think the universe has a sense of humour. And in my case, it waited 11 years, added 60 euros and said, so have you learned anything?
Expensive lesson, but fair. What made you finally buy it?
I didn't want to repeat the mistake. It wasn't about owning it. It was about responding differently. I realized the first time I said no because I wanted to look sensible. And the second time I said yes because I wanted to be alive.
And once you brought it home, what did it change, if anything?
Everything and nothing. I didn't suddenly become enlightened. I just started noticing things again. I was kinder to the barista. I called an old friend I'd been petty with. I even complimented a stranger on the train, which, as an Australian man in Italy, is a social tightrope, let me tell you.
Oh, Oh, I remember that part. The woman reading aloud on the train. That's one of my favorite details. I have you say she was rehearsing to be slightly better tomorrow. Do you think buying the painting made you feel more open to connection in general?
Yeah, I think it cracks something open. It reminded me that beauty doesn't audition. You don't have to earn it. You just have to stop walking past it.
Do you really believe that? That we get second chances?
I do, but not always in the same packaging. Sometimes you don't get the painting back, but you get the courage to buy the next one. Life's generous that way, if you're paying attention.
That's a gorgeous way to put it. Do you feel you would have appreciated the painting the same way if you had bought it back then?
Oh God, no. I'd have hung it in the wrong spot and forgotten about it. It would have just been another object that looked good in daylight. Now it's a conversation. It hangs above my table and occasionally tells me I'm full of it, which I appreciate.
A humble mentor on your wall. You said you're half Italian. Do you think that heritage shapes how you see these second chances? You know, Italians have a way of romanticizing fate.
Absolutely. My nonna used to say, "Se è tuo, ti troverà." If it's yours, it will find you. I always thought that was just her excuse for not chasing the bus, but she was right. Some things, or people, circle back. You just have to be still long enough to recognize them.
And now when you look at the painting, these yellow fields and that crooked horizon, what do you see?
Honestly, myself, that little tilt, that refusal to be symmetrical. It reminds me that perfection's boring and that we survive our bad angles. Also, I see a very tangible reminder that wisdom apparently costs €90.
Bargain of the year. But if someone listening right now has their own version of your painting, you know, something they walked away from or someone, what would you tell them?
I'd say pay attention. Life has a way of reintroducing the things you're ready for. And when it does, don't pause for logic. Just nod and say yes. Even if it's small, even if it's scary, especially if it's yellow.
Especially if it's yellow. Well, Elliot, thank you for sharing this with me and for reminding all of us that second chances don't always knock twice. Sometimes they set up a stall in the same square and wait for us to grow up.
Exactly. And this time we buy the painting.
I love how Elliot said that. Beauty doesn't audition. It just arrives. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it waits. His story reminds me that regret isn't always punishment. It can be rehearsal. The heart practicing how to say yes when the question comes around again. And it will. Maybe not as a painting, maybe as a voice or a message or a moment that feels uncannily familiar. If you've ever had a second chance or wished for one and want to imagine what it might look like if you had said yes, I'd love to hear from you. You can send your story to sayonemorethingpod@gmail.com. Because sometimes the stories we didn't finish are just waiting for a better ending. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.